Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the discussion, How Real-Time Makes Payments Real Easy. We are delighted to discuss these new ways to pay and what you must do to succeed in the future. My name is Sandra Horn, and I will be your moderator today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please note we have placed all lines on mute to eliminate background noise and any distractions for the presenters and attendees. Please use the chat feature to communicate with the host should you have any questions. You can submit questions for the panelists at any time. I will ask your questions as they fit into our discussion, and we will have a time specifically for questions at the end. Submit questions anytime using the Q&A function on the WebEx interface. During the webinar, we'll present a number of poll questions to keep this event interactive. When prompted, please answer the question by visiting the WebEx control pane and locating the question in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. As you exit at the end of the call, you will be presented with a survey. Please take a few moments to give us your feedback. We are now ready to begin today's discussion. Today, you will hear from several experienced practitioners. Cyndi Hendricks Department is responsible for all the money movement, including receivables, payables, and payroll at Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance. Cyndi just returned from vacationing with 2 children, their spouses, and her 5-year-old granddaughter. Eric Foust is responsible for the enterprise product platform that delivers wholesale banking products, including disbursements with Zelle for early warning. He resides in Hudson, Ohio, with his wife and daughter. All 3 are big Pittsburgh sports fans. Mahala Johnson serves as Director of Product Management at ACI. In this role, Mahala leads product strategy for real-time payments and disbursements. She is an avid scuba diver and snowboarder, but by her own accord, not really good at either. Today, you will walk away from the discussion understanding the benefits you could receive from these new faster ways to pay and how to start preparing. Specifically, we'll look at ease of use, security, and how faster payments networks will progress in the U.S. this summer. Now we'd like to begin with a poll to get our audience's perspective. So please answer this poll that will pop up on the right side of your WebEx interface. And the question here is, how familiar are you with faster payments? And the selections here are never heard of it, starting to learn, or you already have a strategy. So again, if you would just go ahead and locate and select your choice, we will go ahead and give that a moment and give people a moment to select their answer, and then we'll take a look at the results. And we're just waiting a moment for the results to come forward. Okay, and there we have it. Okay, so great. So we have on the starting to learn, it looks like we have the majority of people at about 80%, with some newcomers, never heard of it, and already have a strategy almost on the equal at 9%. So that's great feedback. Thank you for that. That will help also as we go through this to guide a little bit of our discussion, knowing that some people are starting to learn, the majority of people are starting to learn about it, and hopefully will provide you more education on your path. Okay, so today's discussion is part of an ongoing education series. So let's start with a quick review of our last discussion on what are faster payments and how is this different than what we've seen previously in the U.S. for payment types. And you hear many different words used in the market to describe this. So it's referred to as faster, real-time, immediate, and instant. And you'll hear these terms used interchangeably. So if we can start out, Mahala, we'll start with you. Can you talk just a little bit of overview of what are real-time payments and some of the benefits of real-time payments?
Absolutely. So real-time payments is a new payment rail, if you will, that's coming to the U.S. That financial institutions will use to clear and settle payments in real time, meaning 24/7 by 365. Real-time payments offers some new flexibility and new opportunity, if you will. First is immediacy. So when a real-time payment has been completed, funds are available in the clearing account for that recipient in generally less than 15 seconds. Certainty. A real-time payment is good funds that are non-revocable. And so for example, for a request to request to pay, the owner that pushes the funds out of their account, again, note that the push out of the payer's account, if you will, once they complete that, it is a push is what I'm trying to say, rather than a pull than you see in typically other payment methods. And all of this is going through the financial institution, so you have that bank-level security. Through the FIs, or the financial institutions, real-time payment capabilities really will allow for the creation and enhancement of digital services to consumers. Particularly, I'd like to note that for real-time payments, they will be utilizing the 20022 message format, so the amount of data with a real-time payment is extensive when we compare it to other payment methods.
Okay, great. That's some great base level information. Thank you, Mahala. And Eric, Zelle has some nuances to that. So can you describe, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Zelle, certainly with the marketing effort going on around Zelle. So maybe go into a little bit about what it is and some of its unique characteristics.
Yeah, sure. So first off, we are not a new payment rail. We are a connoisseur of payment rails, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute here. So if you're not familiar, Zelle is an alias-based network that's owned and operated by the banks. We use email address and mobile numbers in place of sensitive financial information. Behind the scenes, we work with the financial institutions to map that alias to your actual deposit account. So this means that you don't have to give someone your account number and routing number to send you an electronic payment like you do today for first-generation ACH. So since we're owned by the banks, when someone sends you money, it goes directly into your bank account. There's no need to have a middleman account where you have to fund it and then withdraw from it. It goes to your actual bank account. And when you receive funds, they're typically made fully available within minutes. So Zelle is mostly known as a person-to-person payment network. Sandra said maybe you've seen one of our TV ads or heard one of our radio spots over the past couple of months, but we are more than just a person-to-person network. Businesses can send money to consumers using the consumer's Zelle alias, that email address or mobile number. And typically, this replaces the business's check writing process, or if they're concerned about storing that sensitive financial information because of a potential hack or employee fraud, it can replace that legacy ACH process as well. So at its core, Zelle is intended to make sending a payment easy, fast, and secure. And in 2017, the network saw 247 million transactions worth $75 billion. We have more than 100 financial institutions in the network, and we cover more than 80% of online DDAs, as well as 97% of all debit card holders. And as to kind of tie this all back together, as I mentioned in the very beginning, we're a connoisseur of payment rails. Let me explain. We enable payments to be fully available to the recipients within minutes through our API connections between our participants, who are the financial institutions, and our strategic partners. So bank-to-bank settlement can occur a couple of different ways. We use ACH for in-network bank-to-bank transfers. The consumer receives the money within their account within minutes, but the receiving bank, that consumer's bank, doesn't actually receive funds from the sending bank until typically the next day because they're using legacy ACH. Our network governance allows that receiving bank to hard post the funds into the consumer's account without actually receiving the funds from the sending bank. Then we have strategic partnerships with Visa and MasterCard to use Visa Direct and MasterCard Send when people enroll in the Zelle app. And this allows our consumers whose banks are not part of the network yet to still send and receive money within minutes. And then sometime down the road, we may leverage the newest payment rail, which Mahala was referencing, which is that RTP, and the clearinghouse is the one that developed that. So on this slide, hopefully you can see that Zelle, we are ubiquitous. We have good funds verification with fast funds availability. We're a low-cost alternative, data-rich. We don't yet have requests for payments on the business side. We do on the P2P side, but not on the business side. But it is something that we're currently investigating. So more to come from the Zelle side. Sandra?
All right, and so Mahala, Eric mentioned Visa Direct and MasterCard Send. We've got those here on this chart. I think people are familiar with credit cards, but maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on the Visa Direct and MasterCard Send options.
Yes, and you know, they're also known as push-to-debit transactions, which really allows for disbursements to utilize a debit card that ultimately settles to the consumer's bank account or DDA account. Eric mentioned minutes. I go by what I've been instructed over the years is really less than 30 minutes, but it's generally very, very quick in a few minutes. This is another innovative way to get funds to a consumer quickly that will ultimately help increase customer satisfaction and potentially help reduce operational costs associated with disbursements. Again, it's ubiquitous where the consumer has a debit card, Visa or MasterCard, that they're being pushed funds from the sending entity, if you will. It's fast, it's relatively low cost, it's got good data that goes with it. And again, it's a credit push.
All right, thank you. So then on this next slide, we have the results, some of the questions from a survey that was performed by OVM, Global Payments. And I wanted to explore this a little bit. So Mahala, maybe you could start with a little bit about how faster payments can save organizations money, the left chart here.
Well, yeah, and so, some of this is going to depend on dollar amount when you compare it to other payment methods. So, for example, it could be lower cost than a credit card transaction based on the amount, but it probably will be higher cost than an ACH, just for full transparency. From an operational cost perspective, we really look at the benefits that come from moving money faster, where again companies could see an increased cash flow, potentially reduce customer support calls when they're looking for payment status or just want to confirm that they got payment. If fund certainty is required based on minimizing the cost associated with service termination or reactivation. For example, if you're a utility provider and rather than terminating service, you look for utilization of faster funds to be able to get those funds, guaranteed funds, in the account now to minimize or mitigate those service terminations. And then you would also look at cost savings that potentially would come from payment exceptions such as chargeback or ACH returns. Particularly with real-time payments and it being good funds that are non-revocable, those costs should minimize over time.
All right, and Cyndi, let's bring you into this conversation. From your perspective, how do you see how faster payments could help with customer service on the front of customer acquisition and retention? What do you see there?
Well, what we see here, what we're looking for is a way to, when we offer our insurance products like over the internet, we can bind insurance a lot quicker, especially if we have good funds. Today we do that with credit card payments for sure, but we'd also like to find a more affordable way to do that than what the current discount rates are through credit cards.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about how do you prioritize this, adding this faster payment capability relative to the other types of initiatives that you have?
Well, it's like, everybody else's business. There's certainly a lot of different things from a technology standpoint that we're all looking to do and move faster and being able to sell more products and have more services out there available. So as we look across, what we're doing, we're consistently moving towards finding, ways to reduce the number of systems that we use. I don't know if you guys are very familiar with the insurance companies, but they tend to have a lot of different policy systems and billing systems, and trying to reduce that footprint to where you have things that are a lot more manageable to be able to issue your billings out and be able to collect those and streamline them more. So where this would fit in is, constantly having it in the line of sight to where every movement we make gets us closer to being able to implement or take advantage of new payment options that are out there.
All right, and I think actually we'll move to some of the use cases that'll tie right in with what you're saying there. So if we do look at some of the use cases and the scenarios where this is an option, and how will faster payments actually be used in this environment? We've got a few examples here. Eric, do you want to talk about what attributes sort of make certain scenarios more likely for a faster payment to be used?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the two things to focus in on are removing friction from the equation, as well as providing better security both to the consumer as well as your employees. And there's a lot of examples that we could give where a business is sending money to a consumer, but for this presentation, we'll focus on the left-hand side, student refunds and insurance claims. The example here is for students' refunds. Students enrolled at universities, they're issued refunds for overpayments, and it's a lot more often than I ever would have imagined. And the example here is students using financial aid to pay eligible items like tuition, fees, room and board, et cetera. They may have a surplus at the end of the day, and that university is obligated to get that surplus back to the students. And oftentimes that's done via check or direct deposit. And the problem with that is, obviously, checks are hard to track, and direct deposit requires the student to provide their bank account information, something that they may not have easy access to. I don't know many millennials that are carrying a checkbook with them. And then there's also the added risk elements of the employees of the university having access or potentially having access to that student's bank account information. So instead, that university could issue the refund to the students using their email address or mobile number. It's electronic, so it can be tracked. And the student typically knows their email address or mobile number, so it's really easy to send. And I did a joint presentation with Bank of America at NACHA in San Diego this year, and we used Middlesex Community College out of Massachusetts as the focal point. They implemented Zelle for disbursements and saw the efficiency gains and adoption that they were hoping for. The other use case is the insurance claim payouts, and I think this is probably the most popular one whenever you're listening to a presentation about disbursements, B2C, and sending a payment alias-based, so you're sending a payment to someone's email address or cell phone number. This seems to be the most talked about one. But in this example, someone may have been through a traumatic event like a house fire, and giving the consumer a check may add some friction because now that consumer may have to go to the bank to deposit those funds, which could be a hassle depending on the time of day, might be at night, and also the day of the week. It might be a Saturday or a Sunday. Or if the adjuster wants to send an ACH, the consumer may not have their account number and routing number immediately available because their checkbook was unfortunately in the fire. And then timing could also be an issue, right, when sending an ACH, because that service is typically only available during bank hours, which could cause a delay in getting those funds. So as an alternative, allowing that insurance agent to be able to send a payment via Zelle using the consumer's email or mobile number removes that friction from the process. And when you're dealing with a traumatic event like a house fire, removing friction from the process is very much needed from the consumer side, and you're helping them meet their expectations that you're going to be there for them whenever it counts.
Yeah, I think you're right that example, it really does resonate. It's one of those examples that you can really see the benefit of speedier funds there. Okay, thank you for that. So we've got mortgage closings and bill payments here as well. Mahala, could you elaborate a little bit about how faster payments there could be used in those scenarios?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I recently closed on a house, and while I had finished signing, the documents, I actually had to wait a number of hours after the closing docs were complete so that everything could fund. And you think about how being able to utilize faster payments to get the funds to multiple recipients. I mean, you think about the different folks that are involved in a mortgage closing, whether that's title and property insurance, whether that's homeowners insurance, state, county, city tax payments that have to be set up, or even the recording fee, right? All of those are participants, and with faster payments, all of the funds could be delivered much more quickly, reducing the amount of time spent to do the final closing, if you will, and really help improve that customer satisfaction. On bill payments, I touched on one a little bit ago with regards to if a consumer is in a position where maybe their service is potentially going to be terminated if they don't make their bill payment today, right? And utilizing faster payments is an option for billers to receive those funds, know that they're good funds, that they're non-revocable funds so that they can continue with service. As well as, you know, as Eric mentioned, more and more millennials don't really know what their checkbook is. And so, you know, when they're paying their bills online, looking at these opportunities for them to use a social token becomes very, very interesting, and particularly when it comes to a customer experience. Back to you, Sandra.
Okay, you know, the other thing that strikes me actually is there's the element of not knowing their account information and not locating the checkbook. But in the example of like the student refunds, also the compliance issues that come into play if the university were to be holding that account information, whereas instead if they just have, you know, in the case of Zelle, a mobile phone number or the email address, that's information they would already have, and they don't have the same compliance requirements for maintaining as they would for account information. So there's a benefit on that side too.
I would also add there that, you know, students tend to move a lot during those college years, and having to maintain that contact information, particularly when you're sending out a refund check, I think students are less likely to change their email or cell phone address versus their physical address. So I think that's just another benefit to what Zelle can bring.
Yeah, very good point. So carrying on from the bill payment point as well that you made, so it's one thing to be faster and speedier with the payment, but there are definitely other benefits too, some of which we've already talked about here. So maybe Cyndi, you know, which of these from a customer experience improvement do you think will have the biggest impact on consumers, and you know, why would you say that?
Well, I think reducing late payments, I think, would have a big connection with certainly in the insurance industry to keep policies from lapsing, to make sure that funds can get here timely. I think the insurance industry also has a lot of people that go by automatic draft out of their accounts, but sometimes they don't always know and keep track of when that occurs. So having faster payments where they could push instead of us pull might prevent more overdrafts that we see in that space. Especially, you know, even on online services, sometimes people don't always know or key in the right account information, so it also would cause those transactions to not error out like they do today. They'd be more certain. I think that's probably the biggest things I would see. Knowing the payment was received, typically clients get confirmation of that, and they may not necessarily see it go out of their bank account, but I think they would see, you know, they get a confirmation that payment was made, but it may not be immediate to reinstate a service or a policy. Right,
right. So many more aspects around the certainty and the availability as opposed to just the more quick. And why do people end up in a position of late payments? You know, Mahala, I think you've got some research on this as to why do they end up in a position altogether, whether it might be paying late fees or interest on late payments.
Well, you know, when we look at the numbers, you know, roughly half of consumers don't have the monies, when it comes to late payments, don't have the monies available at the time they need to actually pay the bill. So, for example, if they need to, you know, pay by check, and they have to, allocate, if you will, for the delivery time to the biller. And so I usually have to, if I'm paying by check, which I really don't a lot anymore, I usually have to allocate a few days prior to when the bill's due, just to, you know, so that I can have it delivered on time. But that doesn't always coincide when potentially my paycheck may actually be posted in my account when the check gets cleared. We even see this on like bill aggregator sites where, again, you go to pay a bill, you actually have to pay it a couple of days in advance So that delivery time is accounted for. I think this is one of the benefits I really see from real-time payments is that it's the consumer, when they approve the funds, number one, they know they have to have good funds, right, to push those funds out of their account. And so they have confidence that the funds are in their account, that the recipient or the biller will receive their funds in less than 15 seconds. Which would ultimately support preventing those late payments in general. But then, you also get that added benefit where the consumer is going to see their account balance immediately updated to reflect, the change in balance. And so I think, when I look specifically at real-time payments and the opportunities there, I think the customer experience is very, very valuable, particularly when it comes to late payments and how consumers can prevent that, and then ultimately the cost or savings benefits to the billers themselves.
All right, so let's get the audience's perspective on this. So we have another poll here. So we'd ask you, again, the poll will pop up on the right side of your WebEx interface. And if you would go ahead and select how will faster payments most improve the consumer experience? Do you see reduced late payment fees, late payments, receive requests for payment, which has the associated invoice details, of course, preventing overdrafts, update checking account balance faster, or just knowing when that payment was received, the confirmations that were mentioned by Cyndi. I'll ask you to go ahead and respond, and again, we'll just take a moment to let the results calculate and share those with you.
Hey, Sandra. While they're giving their poll answers to fill the time, just a quick story about challenging someone to find their account number and routing number. I made a bet at a bar with one of my friends that they couldn't find their account number and routing number in order to send an ACH payment on their phone in 5 minutes, and they were very confident that they could do something like that. Turns out they couldn't. They couldn't find it on their DDA statement. They couldn't find it with an online banking. So it really is an inconvenience whenever you are in a pinch and you need to provide that bank information in order to have that payment sent to you. Having an alias to fall back on is a crutch that a lot of people don't realize that it's there to use and can really come through in a pinch.
That's a great story, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think actually the industry, that's part of the challenge to the industry is actually getting that kind of central database too that can be used more generally too, right?
Good. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we have the results showing. If you could see those on the screen there. Let's see, we have quite sort of a bit of an even spread between update checking account balance and knowing the payment was received, and slightly lower with reduced late payments. So again, some sort of rising to the top choices of how the consumer experience can be improved here. All right, moving on then. So if we sort of switch a little bit to the disbursement side again, and looking at the process of disbursement, Eric, you just touched on it in terms of the ability to not need an account number there. So what feedback, Eric, well, I'll start with you there, have you heard from consumers about wanting to receive funds faster, and then also how to make it happen?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm going to comment first on the person or the entity sending the money. And the majority's expectation there is the funds come out of their accounts, they believe that the money should be in the recipient's account. When we're talking with commercial entities, they typically have a better grasp on the banking system and understand why there might be a delay in funding. But when we're talking about it underneath the guise of faster funds, there's no exception there. Faster funds should mean that that individual has received the payment as quickly as the money has come out of their accounts. Now, on the receiver side, without setting the proper time frame expectations up front, the recipient's going to think the money should be available as soon as it's sent, and if it's not, that's when they start thinking there's a problem. So when you're sending a payment to a consumer and the messaging is clear, you tell them that it's going to take 4 days to get into their accounts, there's this feeling of forced acceptance because they have no other option but to wait the 4 days. And forced acceptance doesn't create a positive reaction from the consumer. However, whenever you tell them that the money is going to be available in their accounts within minutes, so that's actually meeting their expectations, and meeting expectations does create that positive interaction that you, the corporate clients, are looking for. And you know, it's starting to really feel like the tide has turned where real time is no longer just a desire on the consumer side. It's an expectation. And we can thank our smartphones for driving that expectation home, where we can do things in real time. We can shop in real time on our phone. We can get answers to questions in real time on our phone. So banking shouldn't be any different from the consumer's perspective.
Okay, and actually we have a related question that has come in that while you're speaking there, Eric, I'll address it to you related to this because it is Zelle related. So the question, and I think you're going to have to orient around it, is do the consumer and merchant need a Zelle account to use real-time payments?
The consumer nor the merchants, well, the merchant does not need to have a Zelle account. So the business, in order to initiate a payment into Zelle, needs to have a bank account with one of the banks that's in our network that offers disbursements. So there's no special Zelle account that we offer. It's just working with your financial institution and getting set up with that treasury management capability. If you're familiar with the ACH module within the treasury side of financial institutions, or the wire module, or positive pays, this is going to be found within the treasury management division. And then on the consumer side, in order to enroll in Zelle, if your bank is part of the network, that consumer enrolls in the bank's app or in the bank's website. They'll link their token into their actual bank account. If the consumer's bank is not part of the network, then they'll need to go out and download the Zelle app. So this is where the consumer is actually doing a little bit of work. And they are going to enroll either their Visa debit card or their MasterCard debit card in order to receive those funds. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then, so normally when we're talking about disbursements, you know, the treasury manager, the cash manager, we're aimed towards having a slower cash out model, faster cash in model. So Cyndi, I'll ask you this question. You know, when you look at this, what impact to cash flow could there be by sending money out in this faster form? And then, you know, what types of payments have to be fast, and which types would you say can just continue as they are today?
Well, for sure, sending money out in this form, it would, you know, have some impact to cash flow depending on which ones you selected to send that way. What we would encourage people to look to do, what we would look to do would be to identify just those, you know, those that are the expectations for the client to receive those funds rapidly. For example, the claims we were talking about earlier, you know, when you have an event that requires, you know, you to replace your clothes or be able to put a roof over your head or anything that's not banking hours, and, you know, it would be better for us to be able to send claims funds out in a way where they had immediate access to those funds. That's not a decision on whether or not we have the better float, it's whether or not our client's taken care of. And that's what, you know, we would look for is how are we first taking care of the client, then we'll work through the issue of the float. Some of the things that, from a disbursement standpoint, that we probably wouldn't look to speed up through this process, quite frankly, might be paying out vendors. Unless there's a way to negotiate better pricing with them, then there wouldn't make sense to speed that payment process up.
Sure. So that makes a lot of sense. You're looking at it from it's an improvement to your customer's experience where you can add value and add a better servicing to them, but not necessarily you don't need to improve that service to your vendors. Okay.
Yeah, they've got good service already. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've had another question come in, so I would like to address this as well in line here with the conversation. And it's for Eric. So Eric, can a small business link their business bank account based on their email/phone too?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And right now it all depends on the bank that they are at. So if you're an out-of-network small business, meaning your bank's not part of the network, you're not able to enroll through the Zelle app. Yeah, there are some banks in the network today that do allow small businesses to enter their cell phone number or email address to enroll to send and receive. Now, the network as a whole, we have a small business initiative underway currently to really scope out this industry and better serve it and make small business more predominant within the network, because a lot of small businesses, have told us that this capability is something that they want to gravitate towards. So it's one of the calls that we're trying to answer sometime in the 2018-2019 timeframe.
I would see a lot of benefits to small businesses there as well. All right, thank you. We're going to move then to the topic of security always comes up around the faster payments. So on this, Eric, I'll ask you also, so what are some of the security aspects of this technology, and how can we make people feel more comfortable as it's related to making these types of payments, using their phones? How would you comment on that?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, first, the intent of using an alias to initiate a payment is to remove that sensitive financial information from the payment equation. If a bad guy has my account number and routing number, he can do a lot more harm very quickly, more so than if he had my alias. With an alias, there's multiple decentralized points of reference that help protect the actual account number and routing number that's attached to my cell phone number or email address. But outside of the alias, you can make it really easy for fraudsters to steal money quicker. I think the new quote here for faster funds is faster funds means faster fraud. That's why for the Zelle network, we've wrapped the entire thing in bank-grade security. If a consumer is enrolling at their bank, that consumer has to verify who they are, that they're in possession of the email address and or mobile phone number, and the verification of Eric is who he says he is doesn't just happen whenever I enroll. It happens whenever I log in to receive or send or just view my activity. There's constant checks occurring to ensure that I'm the right actor in that equation. We use multiple layers of authentication and incorporate our legacy fraud and risk products at early warning to enable our consumers and corporate clients to send money easy, quickly, and safely. And we have 24/7, 365 fraud monitoring in addition to the bank's monitoring. So if we identify a fraudulent transaction or fraudulent activity, we have the resources to pinpoint it and shut it down quickly. So using an alias to send money, it's just one step in the right direction. Beyond that, you have to ensure that the service you're providing, you're setting up, or you're going to be enrolling in, that the fraud and risk components are built into that solution as well. So in summary, there are multiple layers of authentication, multiple layers of identity, and security, and fraud and risk mitigation tools that should be incorporated into your faster payment solution. And the example here for Zelle is integrating that bank-grade security.
Great. And Mahala, is there anything you want to add to that? That's a pretty comprehensive answer, I think.
It is. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate you helping me out there. I think the other thing that I would add is that, because we are so hyper-connected with our cell phone devices in our hands, and even in my personal experience, when I send a Zelle payment from my bank account, not only am I doing it through my bank app where I've authenticated myself, right, so I'm pushing funds out of my account, I'm also getting a subsequent notification with a code that I ultimately need to go back, add that to my send request, if you will. So I think that the financial institutions are also doing a lot of work in this space to make it as secure as possible. When I look at, particularly for the request to pay through RTP, the other piece here is that while the consumer can initiate the bill payment from the biller's site, ultimately that request to payment message is going to their financial institution, who will present it to the consumer, for the consumer to then authorize the push of the funds out of their account. Again, this then utilizes that banking or financial institutions authentication and authorization processes to add that additional layer of security. So those are my 2 points.
Yeah, and I think what's particularly interesting too is maybe those that have not felt comfortable with a direct debit model because of the credit push model might also now be a candidate for a digital payment type, whereas previously they wouldn't entertain it, right?
Yes, exactly. Again, it gives the consumer more control when funds leave their account. Again, they good funds, make sure they're comfortable, and then again, that immediate account balance update to give them comfort level. And then on the biller side or the recipient side, they're also getting the notifications that the payment is complete in real time. So again, the whole life cycle of the payment, if you will, is completed within just a few seconds.
Right. So we do have another clarifying question along the way. I think there is definitely an education curve around Zelle, Eric, the questions we're getting. So for you again, it's about the workings of Zelle. And do all banks have the Zelle app available even if the consumer needs to download?
Okay. Let me see if I can connect some dots here.
Wrap that up, yep.
Yeah, of the banks that are in network, so there are, again, 100+ banks that are considered in-network. About 24 of those banks have launched the Zelle experience within their app as well as their online banking site. That means when you log into that bank, one of those 24 currently live banks, in the top right-hand corner or top left-hand corner, depending on the FI, there's a hamburger button, right? So it's 3 horizontal buttons. And when you click it, it typically shows you the options that you want to do. You want to send money, do you want to look at your statements or view accounts, and then there's going to be an option to send money with Zelle. That is, when you click that, that is the Zelle experience. So if your bank is one of those 24 today, you have that ability within your current bank app or bank website, okay? So the banks that are in network but not yet live, so they're building to it, and they'll be launching that experience here in the next couple of months. In the meantime, if you want to send money or receive money in Zelle, you will be going to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store to download the Zelle app. So if someone sends you money, you're going to get a notification that you need to enroll in Zelle in order to receive those funds. And you download the Zelle app through one of those 2 app stores, enroll your debit card to receive as well as send, and away you go. You can send and receive. So if you're an out-of-network individual, you have to go out and download a new app. If your bank is in-network and currently supporting the Zelle process, you do not have to download a new app. It's already available within your phone. And if you're curious, you can go out to zellepay.com to see the banks that are currently in-network. That will let you know if your bank is one of the ones who are signed up for Zelle.
All right, thank you. And I encourage everybody to give it a try, right? It's easy enough to send $1 to a friend to give it a try.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's that crystal ball time, and I'm going to ask, how we see in the relative near term faster payments progressing. So looking at it from a sort of a timeline of end of summer, Eric, what are your thoughts in terms of where you see faster payments moving?
Oh, mass adoption of Zelle for sure. I'd say that tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but wrapping it back into the very first poll question you asked, the majority of folks said they're just starting to learn about this, and that's actually very satisfying from my perspective, because a year ago at this time, the vast majority of folks who responded would say they had never heard of it or haven't thought about it. So that says that we're starting to trend in the right direction. Having people start to think about it means that they're going to include it most likely on their 2019 planning process, since 2019 planning is already in session, at least at early warning it is. And by doing so, you're not going to maybe have faster payments implemented by end of summer. Actually, I don't think there's any way you can do that if you're just starting, but you're going to have a path forward. And that path forward can be comprehensive. So getting that sort of game plan or playbook is one of the outputs that I see that's going to occur by the end of the summer is starting to put resources just dedicated to figuring out what's your plan for your company as far as getting into the faster payment space. What's the business case that you can make in order to justify a change? What about your consumers? So having that be an output from the end of the summer is one thing. I also think that the clearinghouse and RTP rail that they've created, that's going to start getting a lot more traction as far as just consumers starting to understand the significance of what they built, and understanding that the banking system in the U.S. is now finally starting to change, and we're becoming real time, 24/7, 365. Banker hours, you know, are no longer part of the process as far as sending or receiving payments. You know, and that's I guess to summarize, that's really it. I think that folks are going to get their plans in order. They're going to start thinking about it a lot more and figuring out their path forward.
All right, thank you. And Cyndi, Eric sort of sets you up for that a little bit with, so your organization and what are you thinking about? What should other organizations like yours be thinking about in this regard?
Yeah, I agree with exactly what all the things that Eric was saying. You know, I was thinking, you know, for our own organization, you know, my primary objectives right now are start making sure I'm educating, communicating with people that aren't in the finance aspect of this business to get them on board with how we can improve that customer experience and what's coming, and start planning and getting visions together for it to make sure as we make changes to all of our technology, we're keeping an eye on what's needed to be able to really deliver this as soon as it becomes more available in the market. So I think it's mostly right now about, in the summer, is educating and starting to get a vision put together as to how we can implement it and what all the uses are.
All right, good advice. And Mahala, you've been deep in this topic relative to our solutions. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of prototypes and user groups as part of this?
Yeah, you know, because this is new in the U.S., you know, really making sure that when this is exposed to consumers, that it really has the right user experience is critical. There are a number of aspects to this, but most specifically probably the education piece and how you make that user experience feel intuitive. And so we're actually on our third round of prototypes, right? For adding this as a new payment type, for adding this as a disbursement option, and really want to make sure that, again, what we're delivering works for the consumer, because ultimately they're the ones that have to use it. And so what I would offer up right now is that, you know, we've been through a couple rounds, like I said, internally to look at this user experience, and now we'd like to take that next level and invite some of the biller community in to, you know, provide feedback on the user experience and the prototypes that we've done so far. You know, this summer is really for us to, you know, yes, we're working on the plumbing on the back, you know, on the back end side, but it's also this opportunity to really understand what the user experience needs to be so that as it is delivered to market, that it really works for the consumer. So for those of you on the call that may be interested in participating in this upcoming user group, you can do so. I believe there's going to be the ability for you to indicate your desire, if you will, either in the survey or as part of the post-webinar email communication.
All right, thank you. And to that point, so we are going to move on then to our final audience poll, which is asking exactly, you know, when would you like to discuss steps to prepare for faster payments? And this is a conversation that then ACI will reach out and discuss those specific steps for your organization. So is your answer that you would like to have a conversation immediately, within a couple of weeks, 1 month, or 6 months? And we would appreciate, again, you to go ahead and answer that by selecting the appropriate answer in the WebEx window. So for our next webinar, I did mention that this is a series that we have been running. So for our next webinar, it's going to be coming in November. We'll discuss what it will take to maximize satisfaction and savings as it relates to real-time, talk about how to switch consumers to real-time payments, and what pitfalls to watch out for. So please look for our invite. Again, that will be held in November. And then at this point, we'd like to move on to questions. We have taken some questions, and there are a few more queued up, but please, if you have a question, go ahead and use the Q&A portion of the WebEx bar there to enter your question. So at the moment, the first of the questions that we have is whether international money transfer is possible with Zelle or RTP, which is the TCH, the Clearinghouse Real-Time Payments Network. So Eric, do you want to go ahead, I guess, and answer that one, please?
Sure. So today, international payments are out of scope for the Zelle network. We're going to continue to focus on domestic for the short term, and eventually we may branch out to the international world as an opportunity, but for now and the time going forward, it'll be domestic only.
Okay, and I can answer for the real-time payments system offered by the Clearinghouse as well. It's similar. It is a domestic network today. They are working internationally with other central infrastructures to be able to be compatible over the longer term in order to enable international. But at the current time, it is domestic U.S. dollar. Okay, and then the next question we have, let's see, is if we want to send money faster to other third-party lenders, it depends on what bank the third-party lender uses, correct? Oh, sorry, my screen just shifted. If their bank uses Zelle, do they have to accept the payment? If their bank isn't in the Zelle network, is there a solution to send money? Bit of a long question. Did you get the essence of that, Eric?
I did. I'm going to break it down, I think, I'm going to break it down in two parts. So I think the first part of the question was about sending money to another third-party lender using Zelle in a B2B transaction. So big business to big business is not in scope for the Zelle network. We have consumer to consumer, or P2P, person to person, as an approved use case, as well as business to consumer payments. And in that business consumer environment, depending on the bank, small businesses may be eligible, at least today and going forward. We're looking to build that small business use case out. But as far as like a B2B approach, that is not what the Zelle network is intended for. Something like the RTP network could be, and probably should be leveraged when you're doing a B2B transaction, since they're able to have the ISO 20022 message format and exchange that information between each other for straight-through processing. It makes a little bit more sense on the B2B transactions to look at RTP. And sorry if I was stepping out of my bounds there and speaking on behalf of the Clearinghouse or RTP. It's not my specialty, but I talk to those guys a lot.
And just to add to that, Eric, and thank you for bringing that up, because, I mean, that is why we're looking at multiple faster payment options, because there's different use cases that fit each one of them based on where they're currently at in their business life cycle, right? Initially, Zelle was a P2P or C2C opportunity, and now, looking at the B2C from the disbursement side. But B2B, really, the play there, the focus there is RTP and what the Clearinghouse is doing. And so that's one of the things that we're taking into consideration on the ACI side is, depending on the use case, the amounts, those sort of things, there's different payment methods, different faster payment methods that are really the right one to be presented to the consumer. And I'm using my little bunny ears right now, because that consumer may be a business, and certain payment routes may not be the best use case for them to go.
And Mahala, that fits in well with the next question that's queued up specifically, because it does say in the case where ACI is used between the business and the end user, where would Zelle fit in?
And so from my perspective, I look at it as a payment method that, again, based on what the client wants to offer to their customer base, and then based on, some different considerations, like is it truly a consumer versus a business? So that might be one specific criteria that we look at before presenting the payment path. What is the dollar amount associated with, right? So, Zelle, I think your limit is, don't quote me, $5,000, but that also varies at the financial institution level, whereas the clearinghouse, I believe they're set at, oh gosh, I can't remember roughly, $10,000. No, that's rapidly going to change, right? So there may, depending on the various parameters within the payment need, there may be different payment methods, faster payment methods that are presented to the end user. I hope that helps.
This is Eric. I'm kind of answering the limit question there. From my knowledge, it's the TCH is $25,000 currently.
Thank you.
And they're looking at, they're expanding that. And then from the Zelle perspective, this might shock some people, there is no limit that the Zelle network places on these transactions. It's a sender-side risk model. So the financial institution that owns that connection with the corporate client who's initiating that payment, the onus is on them to do the due diligence on that entity. And that financial institution was going to set up the parameters as well as the limits in place for that specific disperser. It can be different from disperser to disperser. For example, and I'll give you an example, the highest payment that we've seen so far this year is $451,000. That went real time. So the consumer, this was an insurance settlement, the consumer was sitting there next to the insurance adjuster. He pushed in the email address, pressed send, and snap of a finger. That consumer had $451,000 sitting in their account, fully available to them. So Zelle's a little bit different when it comes to this, since it's a sender-side risk model.
And Eric, how would a consumer know they received money through Zelle? Can you just comment on that?
Very cool. Sure. So if you're already enrolled in the network, they will get a message. So if you've enrolled with your cell phone number, your mobile number, you're going to receive a text message saying, hey, ABC Company just sent you X dollars available in your account. If you enrolled in email, then you'll get a notification via email that you've received those funds. So it's all about how you, what token you're using. When I say token, I mean your email address or cell phone number in order to receive that payment. Whatever method or whatever token you've used, that's how you're going to get notified of incoming payments.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, it looks like we have answered all of the questions that have come in. If you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to send them to the address on the screen, billpay@aciworldwide.com. So I want to thank all of our panelists today, and I want to thank you all for spending your time with us today. We hope you found this session informative. Today's session, again, has been recorded, and we will send a follow-up so you may access the recording and share it with your coworkers. Please take a moment to complete the post-event survey that will appear on your screen as you exit the webinar. Your feedback is very important to us, especially as we continue this series of webinars. And this now concludes the session. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.